Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to discuss the tariff clarifications on today's call. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm also joined here by Sarah Kozal, our Assistant General Counsel from Federal Regulatory and Markets. So before we get started today, I just have a few slides to go through for some housekeeping reminders. So this call is being recorded. The recording is for informational and convenience purposes only. So any related transcription should be reprinted without the ISO's permission. These calls are structured to stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives with the understanding that stakeholders have reviewed the material. We will be taking questions throughout the call today, so you can raise your hand at any time if you have a question or comment, and I'll give you instructions on how to do that in just a moment. I just would like to remind you to please start by stating your name and affiliation if you do intend to ask a question or make a comment. And then in the interest of time today, please just refrain from repeating or reiterating what has already been said. So to raise your hand to ask a question, if you connected to audio through your computer or use the Call Me option, you'll want to select the raise hand icon, which is located just to the right above the chat window. If you connected to audio outside of the web conference, then you'll need to press #2 on your telephone keypad, and that will enter you into the queue. You can also send your questions through the chat to either myself, again, my name is Isabella Nicosia, or you can send it to all panelists. So today, I'm just going to hand it off here in a second to Sarah to run through the tariff clarifications matrix, which is available out on the miscellaneous stakeholder meetings webpage. And then after we're done running through the matrix, we'll cover some next steps, and that will wrap up today's call. So with that, I will hand it over to Sarah, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Great, thank you, Isabella. It looks like I have lost my sharing privileges. So, there we go. I am going to share my screen with everyone. One moment here. Okay, can someone confirm that that looks okay? Do I need to, I think I need to do full screen.
Yes. Yes.
That was good?
Perfect.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much. Again, Isabella, I also on the call today have Andrew Ulmer and Sydney Mannheim, who are also attorneys at the CAISO and are helping with this process, as well as Jackie Meredith and Kate Cox, who have been instrumental in this process as well. So thank you to everyone involved. I am going to walk through some of the changes today that are or can be considered more significant, but I will highlight and emphasize that this process, which is sort of a semi-annual process of clarifying pieces of the tariff, is not intended to include policy changes. Again, it's rectifying these minor issues throughout the tariff. So there are 31 pages here, which we will not walk through line by line. Like Isabella said, this is available on the website, and we will repost after after we've addressed all of the comments. So the first thing I'll do is walk through some of the types of changes and give an example of each, and then we'll walk through a couple of additional changes. Isabella gave instructions on how to raise your hand, so please feel free to interrupt if there are questions. Again, these are all sort of one-off changes, so jumping between them, happy to be interrupted at any point. So we'll start with this first page here, and this is helpful because a lot of the major changes or categories of changes can be seen on this first page. So the first type of change that we have here are things that are correcting section headers. There's a handful of these throughout the document. For example, in this section 4.5.1.1.6, the first row, we have a not used section in the tariff, but there is tariff language in the subsections under this, and so we have created a title here. There's others that are similar throughout. We also have changes where we have inadvertently missed language from a prior filing. So this second column here, section 4.5.1.3, you'll see that we've removed the dollar amount here. This was inadvertently missed during an earlier filing. And in the reason for change column, we've indicated which docket numbers these things happened in so that you can easily reference that if you are digging into it any deeper. But again, these are prior approved policy changes that are now just being reflected here, so not new policy. We also have in this third column here, we're removing some requirements that are either duplicative or are actually someone else's requirements. So in this case, this is a NERC requirement that should not be in our tariff. And so again, this requirement still exists, but will no longer be in our tariff. It will continue to be a NERC requirement. And then we also have, that scrolled a little bit faster than I expected. We also have duplicative language in the tariff that we have, that we're pulling up. So this last column here, this last row here shows that under both 4.8 and 4.8.1, we have identical language. 4.8 was intended here as the title, and then 4.8.1 having the actual requirement. So again, kind of a cleanup change here. I have two more examples to go through, but I will pause if anyone has questions.
There are currently no questions in queue.
Okay, thank you. So I am going to scroll somewhat quickly through this, so I apologize if it gives you a bit of a headache. I'm going to scroll quickly to page 8. Here we have two more examples in section 10.2.5.1. You'll see here that we have reference to providing access to entities that do not have access to the CAISO website. We have been cleaning up some of this language, that sort of outdated technology language, and so we've made that change here. Everyone has access to the internet. We assume that everyone has access to the internet. So there's a few things here, similarly related to fax machines. We've cleaned up some of that language and made sure that we do address what the alternate options are as well. So email or post on our website. There's changes like that as well. And then finally, on this same page, I just want to point out that the majority of what you'll see in this document, or what you have seen in this document, are things like this section 11.8.2.4, which are extremely minor typographical changes. So in this case, we inadvertently used the word with when it should have been will. So there are quite a few changes like that throughout this document. Okay, so now that we sort of talked about what this document contains, the types of changes, I'm going to scroll back up to page 1, and I'm going to walk through some of the more significant changes. And again, I'll caveat that by saying not significant in the sense that they are changing policy, but that they look like larger changes here, or that they are like actual clarification more than something that's a typographical error. So I will start, and again, if I'm scrolling past something you have a question about, feel free to raise your hand. We can jump back to that. I'm going to start here on this section 4.10.1.8.3. This is related to congestion revenue right holder applicants. So the CRR holder applicants. We had no language in the tariff that included a timeline for terminating the application. So this would be a case when, perhaps not all of the documents were provided to the CAISO or all the requirements were met. And so we didn't have language in the tariff that clarified how we handled that. So in this proposed change, we've included language that's exactly parallel to the scheduling coordinator application timeline to clarify, again, what happens if this application just sort of sits out there. I'm going to scroll now to page 3. We did receive comments from 6 cities on several of these. We are working through those comments now, so I'll just say thank you to Bonnie and the team there for providing these to us. We do plan to post a new tariff changes matrix once we've addressed all of those. So again, thank you for your comments. We also, on this page, this is sort of a long one on page 8.2, section 8.2.3.1, and on the next page, 8.3.1. We received a question from 6 cities here on removing some of the, or rather, not removing some of the language that we were proposing to remove. I don't know, Bonnie, if you're on the call, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you wanted to share some of your, the question that you had here, I think the high-level response that I have for you now is that I apologize, my computer's sort of toggling there. My high-level response that I have for you here is that this particular section, this 8.3.1, I'll put it there, that change where we're removing this language about the requirements being based on the CAISO forecast of CAISO demand, we're removing that to remove some of the ambiguity around how the CAISO actually, determines these requirements. And so that section read on its own, may look like it doesn't have all the information, but it really is part of this larger section that is addressing the requirements. And so I would point you to the section above this, again, apologies for the toggling, 8.2.3.1, which indicates, which discusses the regulation up and regulation down procurement requirements and is intended to, to be read in concert with the others. So I'll pause here, Bonnie, if you wanted to share anything. If not, we can move on to the next one.
Can you hear me?
Bonnie, you can go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Okay, hi. This is Bonnie Blair. I represent the 6 Cities group. Yes, I guess I was not kind of, in my own mind, linking the revisions that you're proposing to 8.2.3.1 with 8.3.1. Let me just take a second. I mean, can I understand, could you maybe explain why you want to remove the reference to the CAISO forecast of CAISO demand? I mean, to me, that's sort of a key element of your real-time ancillary services, right? You're procuring most of what you think you're going to need in the day-ahead market, but then you fine-tune it in the real-time market. Isn't that fine-tuning largely based on your real-time forecast?
So I'm going to turn this one over to Andrew Ulmer to help me address those questions.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, Bonnie, or good afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in. I hope you're well. Thank you for the question. I think it's a fair question because I think you're right. I think the ISO's forecast of demand, whether it be in the day-ahead market or the real-time market, is, a significant driver of a lot of things we do, and that includes ancillary services procurement. But the language as it's set up in the tariff, well, I suppose you could say is true. I think it does sort of lead us to think there's an ambiguity here. In the context, to say, of regulation up and regulation down, the ISO's forecast of demand is not really the driver of the procurement requirement. There are many other factors that go into it, and including the need to meet control performance standards. But Certainly, our regulation requirements, whether they be in the day-ahead market or the real-time market, could be construed as a percentage of our forecast of ISO demand, but the forecast of ISO demand is not really the driver of what we're setting our regulation procurement requirements of. And frankly, it's also not really the driver, although it's certainly important in setting our operating reserve requirements or our contingency reserve requirements. Those are really driven by, in part, a forecast of demand, but also our generation needs, or our most severe single contingency, or potentially other factors. We have set reserve requirements based in part on our at-risk solar facilities that might cease operating if we have a disturbance based on the volume of solar that's on the system during solar operating hours. So there are other factors that drive our ancillary services procurement. Those are largely set out in our operating procedures, but what we wanted to do here was simply sort of going through Section 8 of the tariff, assess whether or not that this is really accurate and whether or not we needed to make a change. And we thought this deletion would remove the ambiguity in concert with, as Sarah said, some additional language that describes sort of how we set these regulation procurement requirements, which we will provide more details in a business practice manual, but essentially that is occurring based on our historical regulation procurement and then forecast operating conditions. So again, the ISO's forecast of ISO demand is an element, but it's not the sort of only criteria for establishing our ancillary services requirements. And there's other language in Section 8 that clearly specifies that what's driving our ancillary service procurement requirements are really American WEC reliability standards. I'll stop there. I don't know if that helps or provide a little bit more context.
So what I kind of hear you saying is that you're taking out the references to the CAISO forecast of CAISO demand because that having those references perhaps elevates that particular criterion to a level of significance that, kind of maybe overstates it as compared to other possible criteria.
That's correct.
So, all right. So I get that. And I guess maybe what I would suggest then, I would have maybe two suggestions. One is, I think in your revised matrix, change the reason or clarify the reason for the change. Because when I read it, it says CAISO proposes to clarify criteria that the CAISO uses, but then I don't think there was any. I guess you were clarifying by removing the reference to the forecast, but maybe kind of reword the reason because when I read it, I looked at it and I thought, well, I see that the requirements are to be net of all these other things, but it doesn't really say what the requirements are based on. And then right. The other suggestion.
That's a fair comment, and we can certainly provide some more robust explanation, a description of why we're making a change. Yeah.
I think that would help. And then maybe the other thing that might be helpful is to include something saying that the criteria are set forth in the business practice manual.
Mm-hmm.
Or detailed in the business practice manual, so that people who want to do a deeper dive know where to look.
Again, fair comment. We'll definitely take that back, and that's an easy pointer to add to the tariff. And like you said, provides sort of a direction for those who want to dig into it deeper. So.
I think that would help.
Thank you.
Yeah,
okay.
2 suggestions.
Great. Well, thank you for those comments, and thank you, Andrew, for providing the background there. Okay, I'm going to move on. We have about 11 more of these that I want to walk through on these pages. So I'm going to move to page 7. On page 7 here, we have section 9.3.3. This is a sort of, let me not do that. This is a somewhat minor change, but a clarification that was made in an RA enhancements initiative, the docket number there. This change is to clarify that maintenance outages require a new, to submit a new outage request if these extend beyond the original extent of the outage. So in this section here, we're just indicating that this is intended to cover maintenance outages and not all outages. Move on to page 9. Again, as I'm scrolling through, you can see here that we're capitalizing some letters. There are some more minor things here. You know, and another example is the RTM market startup. The M in RTM stands for market, so we're fixing that. And then some of these fixes too, if you think through, you know, doing a control F scroll through the tariff, we want to make sure that people who are looking for things can find what they're looking for, because the terminology is you know, accurate throughout. So that's part of the intention here. I'm going to scroll to page 9. This section 11.8.6, I wanted to call out not because there's a change here, but because I think there's a process question here that is helpful to explain. This looks like quite a bit of new red language. See, it scrolls onto the next page here. This is actually an issue that happens when we're filing the e-tariff record with FERC. And I will not pretend to know exactly all of the intricacies here of their filing system. Fortunately, we have very capable people to handle that for us. But in this case, there was an error that was made when this was submitted. And so while the filing that we submitted to FERC included this language, the e-tariff record that FERC holds on their website separately did not include this language. And so, you know, this language was in the filing, this language is in our tariff on our website, but it's not held in FERC's e-tariff record. And so we're including it here so that, you know, we can indicate to everyone that we are going to resubmit that through the e-tariff record process, through this process, and that will then align all of the different places that our tariff is held with each other. Again, it looks like a lot of new text, but it is not new text. And if you have looked at the section on the tariff held on our website before, this text would have been in there, and it is in there. Okay, I'm going to keep moving through to page 12. On page 12, we have section 24.4.7, this section here, and then also the section after that, 24.5.1. Both of these sections have to do with the transmission planning process. And what we're clarifying here is in these two sections, so section 24.4.7 is identifying transmission solutions, and 24.5.1 is related to the competitive solicitation process. And both of these clarifications here are intended to be more specific and more inclusive as to what parts of the transmission plan process are utilized in these, or what, I guess, documents are used in these two processes. So the first one includes the revised draft. The revised draft and final comprehensive transmission plan. We've added the word revised to clarify here that that's actually the plan that is sent to the board. And so we wanted to capture that that's the correct version. And then for both 24.5 and 24.5.1, we've added this language that says, or in a supplemental assessment to the final comprehensive transmission plan, whichever is applicable. And so the idea here, again, is to not limit the tariff to the final plan, because we want to recognize that occasionally there is still, an ongoing need to study a particular transmission solution, or we anticipate a supplemental assessment. And again, we wanted to ensure that the tariff captures that there are these additional processes or documents that may come out that we want to be inclusive for these two processes here. Okay, moving on. I guess I'll do a hand check. Are there any hands raised?
No, there are currently no questions in queue.
Okay, great, thank you. So moving through page 15 here, we also received a comment from 6 cities on 27.6, which we are taking into consideration. So again, thank you for that. Page 17. Here we have section 30.7.3.1. Again, we have some comments from 6 cities. Again, thank you for those. To clarify the minor things, I think there's a question about the hyphen in use limited, so we are ensuring that we're consistent throughout. So thank you for that comment. And actually, I'm going to stay on this page and talk about this last column, or excuse me, last row here, 30.7.3.3. This again is a clarification of the existing policy or existing, what actually happened. This is a section about modifications to resource adequacy, bids for resource adequacy resources. And in this section, the language previously stated that modified bids would reflect the full capability of the resource as defined in the master file. We're revising this because this does not actually reflect what happens. The full amount of the resource adequacy capacity, it can actually be less than what's defined in the master file. So we want to indicate that that's how this is actually addressed. Okay, I'm going to move to page 18 here. This last row again is section 30.11.5. This is related to multi-stage generating resources and their ability to submit reference level changes. This again is existing policy. I believe this came from the CCW process or policy initiative. And this particular piece was not reflected in the tariff. And so it is an existing sort of, as we've indicated in the reason for change column, an existing implicit assumption in the tariff. But ultimately here, we're indicating that when a multi-stage generating resource, if the scheduling coordinator revises the startup bid that was used as the basis for the proxy transition cost, we will then recalculate the proxy transition cost, but that the multi-stage generating resource cannot themselves submit a reference level change request for these proxy transition costs. That piece here that they cannot submit a change was the existing policy that was part of the CCW process. But what we're clarifying here is that the CAISO will recalculate those proxy transition costs if the underlying startup bids that were used to develop those have changed. So I think that was a disconnect in the tariff, or rather a sort of this missing connection between the assumption and sort of what the CAISO will do. So we've revised, or rather we've clarified that in the tariff here. going to jump down to page 22. There are a few that I'm going to talk about this here, section 34.7, and then parenthetical 13. We're updating some language throughout this process, and we talked about this actually on the first page. This is related to some of the updating the language that we use and that NERC and WEC use for different things. And so in this one in particular, we are changing, we're addressing the system emergency language that is outdated, and throughout the tariff, we're adopting the correct NERC-WEC terminology, or rather the new NERC-WEC terminology. So we're also making changes to align with that throughout. So this is one of the examples here where we've clarified that, and you can see in the reasons for change column that there are references to the FERC docket number in which those changes were initially made. So again, a clarifying piece here. Okay, jump to page 23. This document is slightly different than what is posted on the website, and like I said, we will be reposting this once we've addressed all the comments. And so the highlighted language here is intended to show what has changed since the last posting, or since what was posted. This again is in response to a comment from 6 Cities, so thank you for that. The comment was asking for clarification on when the price correction was processed and the time frame there. The original text that we had provided was not clear to when that would be posted, or clear enough as to when that would be posted. So here we've revised it to indicate that the report of all price corrections will be posted by the Saturday of the week after the week in which the CAISO processed the price correction. So hopefully that's a bit more clear for people. And again, thank you for that comment. Okay, and I think, let's see. There's one final change. And so the remaining pages, a lot of these are just these, here's one where we're correcting to the correct cross-reference. There's another here where we're removing a typographical error, 40.9.2. There was an and that was misplaced. So again, very minor corrections here. Again, a tariff cross-reference. I'm going to jump down to this Appendix CD. And this one's the last column on page, or excuse me, last row on page 34. But the change actually is on the next page. So I'll leave that up here. This is another type of change that I just wanted to call out, and it's the last one I plan on talking about today. But this is language that was included due to an overlapping filing. So this is another kind of process issue that occasionally happens when the CAISO is making, or has filed with FERC 2 tariff amendments that both make changes to, related or the same paragraph. And so the way that the FERC process happens, and again, this is one of those things that I understand from a high level and not the specifics, but basically when we are filing both of those, whichever gets accepted first, that language, may not be the language that is in the FERC e-tariff process, held in FERC e-tariff, because that second one, when that language is approved, that will be kind of the last one that was approved, and that will kind of sit on top of the first one. And FERC's e-tariff process does not have a way to rectify those 2 changes itself. So that's something that we then have to go in after the fact and make these changes. And again, I'll scroll up one page. indicate that, there was an overlapping in time filing. You've accepted both of these through, whatever process, an order or through that process, you've accepted both of the languages, but in your e-tariff, they have not been, put together. So this, again, is sort of an alignment process. It doesn't change any tariff. It doesn't change any of the language. The language that you see on, stakeholders see on the CAISO's website is accurate and would not include this red language. But again, it's to fix language that wasn't corrected or wasn't uploaded correctly because of this conflict. All right, so that is sort of a complicated way of explaining what hopefully is an easy concept, and it's certainly an easy fix for us. But again, I just wanted to indicate to all of you that this is not language we're removing in this process, but it's language that had been removed before. All right, so that was the last one that I had. Again, this last one here is putting in a new title that we didn't have. So most of the changes are somewhat simple in that way. I think Isabella at the beginning had indicated that this is posted on the website. So there's an earlier version of this that does not respond to comments. We will be posting a new version. And it's sort of difficult to find, so I can just very briefly let you know, if you're on our website under the Stay Informed tab, you actually have to go to Meetings and Events first in order to find the Miscellaneous Stakeholder Meetings section. So there are a couple of clicks there. So Stay Informed, Meetings and Events, and then Miscellaneous Stakeholder Meetings, and that's where this is posted. We will be posting a new version, like I said, that is responsive to these comments. I'll pause here, though, and see if there's any final questions, either about the process or about any of these particular proposed changes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay, well, in that case, I want to thank you all for bearing with me as we go through what is essentially an Excel spreadsheet here. I appreciate your time and the questions. These were very, very helpful and help us in coming up with the best and most clear language here. So I'm going to turn it back to Isabella to go over the next steps. Thank you, Isabella.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So as Sarah mentioned, we will be posting a revised matrix to that miscellaneous stakeholder meetings page. So again, to get to that page, you can go to CAISO.com, and then you'll want to go to the Stay Informed tab, and then Meetings and Events, and the miscellaneous stakeholder meetings page will be linked on that landing page. So it will be posted there. Just a few reminders, registration for the 2022 Stakeholder Symposium is open. So we will be holding that at the Safe Credit Union Convention Center in downtown Sacramento on November 9th and 10th. So if you haven't registered already, I encourage you to do so. And then in addition to registration, we do have sponsorship opportunities available. And so to learn more about those sponsorship opportunities, you can go to CAISO.com, Stay Informed, and then you'll click Stakeholder Symposium, and that will take you to our symposium webpage where you will find all information related to the event. But with that, that wraps up today's stakeholder call. I'll just pause here to see if there are any last questions.
Okay. There are currently no questions.
Okay. Not seeing any. So that concludes today's stakeholder call. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.